How have you learned to work on and look after your mental health on that journey? And what have been some turning points in that specific element of your life as well?
Therapy was a turning point. Oh my God. But I don't know. I think it's kind of, it's maybe in the last few years, like since all of this has happened, that I've tuned in much more to it. Because I think I've always grown up, I'm very lucky in a household where we communicate very freely and openly about our feelings. My sister is kind of so encouraging of that, and so I've just always thought that like that's enough. If I've been able to talk about my feelings, then I'm fine. I don't need to like talk to a therapist, and like I'm fine, I'm coping. And then when I finally did, you start to tap into all of the things that you have kind of by osmosis absorbed into your subconscious, and that becomes kind of how you see yourself in the world and how you value yourself. And then I started to really focus on like, I don't know, how am I? How do I see myself? And so that has been definitely the most kind of prominent turning point. And also because like as a teenager, you don't realize how much of that shit you internalize and just take in your stride. And I think now we're getting better at identifying that mental health is something worth talking about. When I was growing up, it was just kind of, that's just growing up. Like, that's just the difficulties of being a young woman. And now it's like, well, no, that's definitely an opportunity to have a proper in-depth conversation. You don't need to go through that shit on your own.
It's so interesting when you reflect back on your younger self as well, because I've done this quite a lot recently where I thought about myself and the anxiety that I pretty much had my whole entire life, but never had the words to really talk about it because we never spoke about anxiety, mental health. It was just not anything that was ever brought up, not in my house, not at school, not on TV, not in social media, because we didn't even have it. So it's really interesting when you reflect back and you're like, oh, I was actually suffering from anxiety at that period in my life, but not even realizing. It's such an interesting retrospective process to look at yourself and review your younger self in a way. And I guess that's one of the things that is so good about therapy, right? Is what's maybe the biggest lesson you've learned or taken away from therapy?
I think one thing was the impact of acting at such a young age. And that was something that I was willing to skirt over. That was like first session. I was like, yeah, I started work when I was 11, but anyway, and then, she's like, well, let's just go back to that. And I was like, no, not like a child actor kind of way. I'm totally fine. And then we started to dissect it. And you realize that, you know, so much of being an actor when you're a kid is about being obedient. And that is a really wild thing to have ingrained in you as a girl especially, but at the age of like 11, 12, which I think is a very, at least it was for me, very kind of sponge-like time when you're growing up into a more kind of independent soul and coming into yourself. That's the kind of age where you start to, I think, really absorb the subconscious that forms you. And to be taught that obedience is so praised and so valued, and in a work environment, I'm now reflecting on like what a strange thing that is to kind of comprehend as a young woman. And I really, when I see that now, and the kind of not like people pleasing, but definitely the inclination to obey rather than buck against the system, now I recognize it and I'm like, okay, I want to flip that, I want to do the opposite. So it's things like that, and just kind of, and also the most liberating realization has been how that like my therapist keeps trying to kind of impart this on me, that everything is a social construct and everything is social conditioning, and like we have created this for ourselves, and everyone is kind of within this self-taught system, but that is somewhat arbitrary. So we're all just kind of winging it. And once you kind of dismantle this respect for a fabricated system, everything becomes slightly more palatable and approachable and less daunting and kind of much more open to interpretation and like malleableness. So it's kind of, that's been really freeing. And I try and remind myself whenever especially when the anxiety kicks in, especially when having to kind of be in public and present in any way. It's kind of remembering that we're all winging it.